Oh my God, that voice just intimidated the fuck out of me. And the recording in progress.
Yeah, you were mentioning like serving the robots. Where be nice, be nice.
I'm a victim of technology. I mean, my favorite tool is a jar opener. So believe me, I can do. No, it's very strange because I I recognize the fact that I made a decision many years ago, and it wasn't a decision that was based on any moral choice. It was based on my recognition of the limitations of my skill sets, and on the fact that I bore easily, that I would not follow the route, and I could not follow the route. I mean, let me make that clear. I don't think I was capable of following the route to establish a career and a fan base by way of attaching myself to a character, either an important character who had been left fallow or a character that needed to be revived, as so many of my colleagues have, and build a fan base from that and become stars in this chicken shit business. And, the issue for me was that because I'm a smart guy, but I have limited interests in I'm just not that intrigued by what supports the talent. And I remain kind of appalled that so many of my colleagues, both my contemporaries and those following me, are continuing to be entertained by this junk that got us into this in the first place.
Is this why you do limited series? You do like 6-issue arcs of a story. Like, Hey Kids, each arc has been 6 issues. It's not like I'll do 600 of these and you have to wait 20 years for each one to come out.
Well, I find that most comic books of late, I mean, I find it very difficult to read most comic books, mostly because I'm not the audience. I'm not tapped for this stuff. I mean, and again, it has to be clearly made from my perspective that comic books has more in common with the Jesuitry than anything else. I mean, it's a calling. There's an inoculation process that happens to us, and it's happened to all of us at one point or another. There are those who remain fans and those who become professionals. And, I'm constantly called a cynic, and people just don't understand what cynicism means. I'm a skeptic. I'm a romantic realist. I'm not a cynic by any stretch of the imagination.
You were talking about being, I guess, more like a cult figure. I think that's my favorite thing about you. It's not the cynicism, but is that skepticism, where it's not rose-colored glasses.
I'm the I describe myself frequently as the Van Morrison of comics, but more actually the Randy Newman of comics. Because Randy Newman is a guy that if you know his work, if you're a civilian and not a huge fan, 3 songs. Short People, I Love LA, and if you have kids, You Got a Friend in Me. But there's an entire body of work out there which has no resonance whatsoever or any relationship to those 3 songs. I'm that guy to a profound extent. I mean, the comic book audience in the United States is minuscule. It's tiny. It's barely a flea on the tail that wags the dog. And most of that audience knows me as the guy who did Star Wars when I was 25, and I'm 71. And not only does that work have nothing to do with whatsoever with what I think about myself, certainly the transformation that I went through between that time until I turned in my early 30s and became the talent that I am today. But the audience is committed to holding on to that aspect of the form, because the major companies have convinced the audience that the characters, and I use characters within wildly expansive air quotes, in comic books are the brand. Mm-hmm. And that I tend to believe that the talent is the brand, that who's doing it is far more important than what's being done, than with what, I got into a kerfuffle yesterday with a guy I like really a great deal, a guy I've eaten with on a regular basis, where I dismissed Batman as being about a rich guy who had a bad day when he was 8, as seen through the eyes of a 15-year-old boy.
I wanted to bring that up with you. Yeah, because they keep making these Batman movies, and it's like, I don't need to watch a billionaire in riot gear beating the shit out of poor and mentally ill people. It's just not.
But the audience identifies with that guy. It's one. I mean, a couple of years back, I was a guest at the Big Apple show in the first year of the Trump administration, And we were scheduled to do a panel about the relationship, the systemic relationship between Bruce Wayne and Donald Trump. And they killed it faster than they strangled it in its cradle, but the reality is, to a certain extent, the appeal of Bruce Wayne is very similar to the appeal of the billionaire oligarchs who are actually running the planet for us right now. Because we all think that given the right circumstances, we'd be Bruce Wayne as opposed to the Riddler. I mean, the other thing is that there's a tendency to overpraise this material to so profound an extent.
I was going to mention, where does nostalgia is good nostalgia come from?
I'm going for yes-stalgia these days. I've never seen Doctor Who. I've never seen an episode of it at all. My entire relationship is that in the early 80s, there was a convention in Chicago when the Chicago convention was still in the city. And and it was a big Doctor Who year. And at one point, the power went out in the hotel, the air conditioning died. And I found myself trapped in a ballroom with 3,000 guys dressed as the then current Doctor Who wore a big overcoat, hat, and a scarf. And it smelled like England after the Blitz. It was just awful. I mean, it was disgusting. That completely traumatized me to so profound a degree that when I hear the words Doctor Who, it's like the Three Stooges with Niagara Falls. Slowly, I turn step by step. But this current iteration right now is that there's this whole, every time a new Doctor Who is announced, the social media network is packed with guys who have had it with this. I'm up to here with this. It's just not, the irrelevance of it is frightening. And the fact that people are so often willing to serve as unpaid shills for material which is unworthy of their attention in the first place is staggering to me. I like a lot of shit. I truly do. But I find that my standards, what I like, rarely has anything to do with what the audience goes for. That's one of the isolating and separating aspects of my relationship with the comic book audience. The things I like are not the things they like. And, I'm not interested particularly in rushing to make someone like me. I'm not that likable. I'm situationally kind, and that's about the best I can do. I mean, come on. I mean, comic books is packed with people for whom fatuous is a way of life. And recently, with the recent death of two colleagues of mine, there have been a number of people separate and distinct from each other who have posted, so and so better watch it and take his vitamins, and just the utter tone deafness of this, the cruelty in this, the schmuckery that is innate in that is staggering to me.
One of the things that I've started realizing, like, you start detaching from the fanboy aspect, you start realizing how objectified creators and their work are. They just kind of treat them as content machines. It's like, you're just here to pump out work and I guess not be treated like a person. It's like, people will talk about you as if you're not in the room.
Well, a couple of weeks back, I posted a series of laws of comics, and my first law is that when someone waxes rapturous about your work, they will always also mention a number of other talents, many of whom we despise and have contempt for. So you're in a party of people that you don't want to be eating with. And it all started with Simon. Simon's law is that comic book fans will always tell you the truth, particularly if it's unpleasant. And I completely accept that completely in every way. I mean, we can start by stopping calling people who make comic books creators. It's an awful weight to carry. I mean, Jesus Christ. Speaking of creators, I refer to comic book fans as enthusiasts because they're enthusiastic about their work to a dangerous and unpleasant degree. And I refer to talent as talent. We are talent. It's years ago, I first learned this in my first experience in television. I was interviewed on one of the back in the day when New York cable was just getting underway. There was a show about comic books that it's floating around on YouTube right now.
Is it that? I think it was like a 1980s interview. Yeah, I've seen it.
And I'm so embarrassed by my condescension to these two guys. They deserve better. I mean, that cliche of resting bitch face. Mine is is constant condescension look. You know, it's inescapable. I'm awful in that regard. And but they refer, the guy behind the camera who has as much contempt for me as he did for the guys who were interviewing me, referred to us as the talent. And I thought it was hysterically funny, and I embraced it completely, and I ran with it. So that's how it's been, you know. So go ahead. You set me off. You can't shut me up. I have oral alia from the way back.
Okay, so cut you off at some point. Just
Please,
okay.
I would recommend you do so quickly.
All right. You know, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. You know, you're talking about, you know, enthusiasts and the talent and some of the work that you've done recently, you know, like Hey Kids Comics, the first and second arc, attack that in a way where I don't think anyone else can do it.
I have nothing to prove. I mean, that's one of the things about making the choice that I did. I carved out a space for myself, and it's I recognized many years ago that I was never going to become a star in comic books, because I lacked the gene to support the enthusiasts' fan service obsession. So I went off and worked in television, worked on shows I'd never watch, just utter and complete absolute crap, but that paid me enough to support my life, to build a portfolio, and to buy real estate, and to get a pension. Because unlike a lot of the guys who, you know, who treated me with contempt in the 1970s and are now wondering what happened to their careers, I know what happened to my career. You know, I made it, I built it, because I was smart enough to recognize, to read many Tekel Farsa. You know, I knew that the writing was on the wall and I had to do something about it. One of the things that does is it liberates me from having to pay fan service to an audience which is completely satisfied by YA fiction, which is manipulated into serving as unpaid shills for sturdy junk. And, you know, and I don't live in nostalgia. I understand. I am what I am because of all those dreadful comic books that I read as a kid. I loved Batman comics. I loved everything Bob Kane, Bill Finger, and Shelley Moldoff and all those mooks did. From those I went to Julie Schwartz's books, and from those I went to Stan and Jack's. But by the time I became a professional, I had outgrown my interest and enthusiasm for that, but I love the medium so much. I just love it. I love the language of comics dramatically. I was so disappointed to find a couple of years ago that Ed Sorel, a cartoonist I adore, has utter contempt for the comic book storytelling form. I was fascinated by this because he's really pretty good at it. He's done it a couple of times. But I love the language of comics, and I love the narrative structure that's available to us in comics. I'm not the best draftsman. I'm not the best writer, but the synergy that exists between those two skill sets is what makes my work valuable. And it's something that most people don't recognize, because writing in comics is completely misperceived by both the audience and civilians. They tend to think comic book artists are illustrators, and comic book writers are fictional pioneers. And the truth of the matter is, what we're doing is we're finding a happy medium between graphic design and the service of narrative, and a template of narrative. And that's really what it is. And it's very difficult to deal with an audience whose reading interests have so completely diminished over the past 50, 60 years, to compete for an audience that takes Harry Potter as adult fiction seriously, that reads the, you know, Mockingjay or whatever this crap is. You know, I have a hard time getting involved with this, you know.
No, I mean, this one, just like the nature of it, where it's like a dude showing up to a convention. He's like, hey, sign these books. And he's probably going to go sell them on eBay behind like bulletproof plastic boxes. It's a weird fetishization of newsprint. That's just, it's weird to me.
Well, but it's an aspect of the calling, though. It's a reliquary. I mean, there's a sense of comic book objects as being sacred totems. There's a totemic nature to the material. Okay, that whole slabbing thing is beyond my understanding. I mean, I was a collector as a kid. When right now, I'm working on the third volume of Hey Kids.
Yeah,
it's about family. and it's about fandom, and it's about the experience of how the inoculation works, and how one becomes obsessed with these icons, these bits of business. And when I was a little boy, I was 13, I fell in with a crowd. And again, I mentioned their names in many, many contexts to find out if they're still alive. You know, they were a bit older than me. One of whom had a stack of mint condition Batmans and detectives, which he'd apparently stolen from somewhere. Another was a guy who was an exterminator who traveled around with his selling copies of Golden Age comics in his exterminating bag. So his comic book smelled like formaldehyde. And these are the guys who introduced me to Golden Age stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was a revelation. It was a window open. And at 13, I had a profound curiosity about why the material I was reading today, the more Weisinger Superman books, the Jack Schiff Batman books, were the way they were as they related to this material from the Second World War. And that curiosity is, I believe, what sustained me through my fandom from that to EC, which I got turned on to from those paperbacks.
Yeah.
And then finally to become a working professional. And when I became a working professional, I got work under false pretenses. I was not worthy of the work that I was getting. I was not very good. I didn't get good until I developed a personal discipline. That was 10 years into my career. Mm-hmm. I was a good layout man, but I had I couldn't, you know, it was like Alec Baldwin and Glengarry Glen Ross, you know, coffees for closers. I mean, I didn't become a closer until my early 30s. And a lot of that had to do with unlearning a great deal of expectation.
Were you working professionally when you were working with Gil Kane?
No, Gil, I worked for Gil when I was 18.
Right.
And from there, I ghosted some stuff with Gray Morrow, who was kind enough to let me ghost for him. Just the work was terrible. And I ended up penciling for Wallace Wood. And from there, I went, Neil Adams, currently dead Neil Adams, got me some work at DC Comics. I think he coerced Murray Boltinoff, who in those days was easily coercible, into giving me a one-pager. And I began to get work. Orlando took me under his wing and gave me some stuff. And I really broke out when I demonstrated that I was willing to work my ass off over a weekend to do samples on the Fafford and Gray Mouser book for Denny O'Neil. One of the things that Denny and guys like him found when they worked with me was that I did much of their work for them. Because although I couldn't draw as well as a lot of my colleagues, I knew how to make a picture tell a story, make a page tell a story. I understood the idea of images with narrative value. And I don't think I understood it intellectually. And I believe I understood it instinctually. It was the only instinct that I had. Mm-hmm. And as I've gotten older, that instinct has become conscious and intelligent. And, you know, one of the things that you have to know that the Star Wars book, for example, Roy never saw anything of the work until I broke that script down.
Right.
Roy did not break this.
Is it true that you were working from the film that they gave to you and you had to?
No, I had the screenplay.
Okay.
And I had 400 stills, all of which looked like they were an IKEA showroom in space. And the 18 or 17, 18 were quarry paintings. And the stills were sort of inert. What I did was I broke the script into 6 issues. So that was the first time Roy saw it, when he saw the pencils to write from. And when I saw the movie, there were 3 other people in the theater at the Low East Capitol, the Low East State, one of those long dead movie palaces in New York City. On a Wednesday, it opened on Thursday. And there were 3 other people in the theater. And what freaked me out is when I saw the movie looked more like the McQuarrie paintings than it did look like the IKEA stills. And it was kind of like, there's something bigger than Phil. I still regarded it as a massively expensive version of Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, which might have sent me into a tizzy when I was 15, but at 25, 26, I was over it already. You know, the other thing is that I never expected it to become a source of a secular religion. I expected Elvis to be the font of a secular religion. I truly did.
I mean, again, that's the rose-colored glasses thing. You kind of got to, you know, you were there before it happened, and then now it's it's IP, so we're never going to stop. They're going to keep making these streaming services. There will be not one day without Disney related Star Wars content. It's just going to be like transported into your psyche while you're sleeping.
I watched The Mandalorian a couple of episodes and finally gave up because I realized that I was literally watching something with all the narrative depth of CHAYKIN.
It's Lone Wolf and Cub in space, pretty much. Like the manga exists already. So
I just, you know, I don't. Tom Dish years ago wrote a piece for The Atlantic or the New Republic or Harper's, I forget which, but just which was let us accept the fact that science fiction is a children's literature and get on with it, which apparently pissed everybody off. It really did. It was, and I reread it recently. It's much longer than I recall, and I feel that way to a great extent about this stuff. You know, I feel that, you know, I stopped watching, you know, West Wing and Madam Secretary. Always felt like I was cheating on reality. And science fiction, to a great extent, feels to me as if I'm cheating on reality when I'm absorbed by it. I gave in to the worst impulses of my dear friends and watched the first couple of, I guess, most of the first season of that new Star Trek thing a couple of years ago. And I'm trying to see what it is these people are going so wacky about. You know, one of the reasons why, when I was in my late teens and early 20s and I discovered Chip Delaney's work, Delaney had an understanding that his future was completely alien. Nova is about people who have no resemblance in their behavioral modes to people that I know. And that really spoke to me. Even Alfred Bester in The Star's My Destination, his characters are still mid 20th century characters operating in a fantastical format. But Delaney's characters were otherworldly in so many ways. And Star Trek is just so rich with banality and so utterly recognizable in its tropes that I don't understand the appeal. And again, I recognize the fact that I'm alone here out on a mesa away from others. People are loving this shit. Yeah. Oh, Picard, please kill me now.
Can I get on that boat with you? Can we just?
I like guns, cars, you know, explosions and yelling, people yelling at each other.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you mentioned earlier that I do these short pieces. One of the reasons I do short pieces is that I like to do characters who change and evolve. And, you know, in comic books, evolution and change is defined by the different costume, you know? Yeah.
This is one thing you brought this up. It's not to disparage you or anything. I feel like I was the only person who read this book cover to cover. And, you know, I was on Facebook for like 2 weeks until I thought, fuck it, it's not worth it. Like, nothing is. And
no.
I posted on your page where it was, this is a book that people love to get upset about, but no one has read, you know, like take those 6 issues. It's a thing called character development. You know, it's just, I don't know. It's that reactionary thing, reading that headline and getting upset about something that you don't fully understand. Thank you, social media.
You're dealing with an audience that rejects the concept of actual change, but embraces change in a cosmetic and superficial way. Batman loses his emblem. This is change for the standard of comic books. The assumption is, look, I've described myself all too often as being too weird for the mainstream and too mainstream for the weird, and I stand by that. What's as daunting about being isolated and dismissed by the mainstream comic book audience, and that includes a number of my colleagues who are dead to me now. There's also the idea that because contemporary investigation exists across the spectrum of our business, I'm regarded by the art school crowd, you know, the Art Spiegelman monkeys, as just another superhero guy. Yeah. Because I work in mainstream comics. Yeah, capes, masks, shit coming out of their eyes, you know, that kind of stuff. I was at a convention some years ago, and a couple from South America were discussing me in Spanish in my company with my wife next to me. And I can speak Spanish. And, you know, I'm not great, but you put me in a Spanish speaking country for a couple of days and I'm thinking in Spanish. And they were so shocked that someone they regarded with such utter contempt, whose work they didn't really know, was able to speak in their language. B, was as contemptuous of their lack of interest in me as they were in me. And when I saw their work, it was just so earnestly dull and shitty. I mean, please. Our job is to illuminate, entertain, and inform. And I'm just, you know, I'm glad I still love the medium of comic books because the content is just sucking the life out of my brain. And that includes both sides, I might add.
Burke, you know, I remember you said Divided States of Hysteria was supposed to have a second arc.
Oh, it does.
It does. It's still happening because they put it off for a while. So
I doubt seriously whether Image would ever publish it because I think they took. I don't want anybody to get collateral damage from me. They took enormous shit from me, for me rather. And again, it wasn't just from the pillory of, you know, I mean, it was also colleagues, you know, who were bereft of the understanding of irony when they said, I'm all for artistic freedom, but. The addition of that word "but" at the end of that sentence obviates everything that's preceded it. It's an amazing time in which we live. I'm glad I'm old. I truly am, because I will miss the true shitstorm, which is imminent. I've written the second arc. It's called Hostile Makeover, and it's even more so. And
I can't wait for Twitter to blow up. Can't wait for social media to blow up.
It may never happen.
I feel like people throw around crowdfunding as if it's this end all be all. But have you ever considered that?
No,
never.
I will never crowdfund.
Okay.
Because I know in my heart that it will fail miserably because my audience isn't big enough to generate the money for such a thing.
Yeah.
And I would be trolled. I mean, one of the reasons the alt-right is doing so well in crowdfunding is because people aren't actually buying those books. They're owning the libs. You know, they're throwing money at these people just to show where they stand politically. And the problem is the people who read my stuff don't give a fuck whether anybody knows where they stand politically. You know, as I've said more than once, you know, I'm identified by the left as a demon in a human skin suit, whereas the right regards me as a neutered butler of the social justice warriors. But when you find yourself in the middle between these two people, the left dismisses you as a lost cause, whereas the right sees you as a potential ally. And they're both wrong. You know, I'm here in the middle. Fuck you guys. You know, I'm just not that interested in the exclusive nature of inclusivity, nor am I interested in the toxic masculinity that's attached to so overtly homoerotic an art form. You know, I mean, you know, comics has always been about, you know, hot men. You know, I mean, really,
spandex and authoritarian actions, beating up on the little man while trying to save the little man.
Look at those gluteal maximi. I mean, you know, I mean, oh, well, Superman's got a good booty. You know what I'm saying? So, but you know, I'm just not that interested in getting into this street fight with these people. I mean, I aged out of Marvel and DC about a decade ago. And at the time I resented it profoundly. And I kind of woke up one morning and said, you know, it's really cool. I'm perfectly happy with this because it means that on the occasional, they throw me a job here and then I'll do a superhero thing. Yeah. And I'm reminded once again that, you know, all the notes I used to get when I was doing this stuff was use their powers more. I hate powers. I like people yelling at each other a lot more than I like people blowing shit out of their eyes and stuff.
I love that you did a Spider-Man comic and there were only 2 instances of Spider-Man and the rest of it's just people talking in bars. I was like, fuck yeah, Chaykin.
You didn't even notice that Daredevil was in there too. He was up on the top in the corner.
Yeah, I mean, this was the first mainstream comic I bought in like 3 years. So
it's pretty funny. I mean, you have to admit.
I was wondering, you know, because you have a lot of the people that you work with regularly, you know, Ken Brusnick is still on it. Was that a discussion or is it just assumed that if you're working on something, Brusnick's going to come with you?
No, I bring him in. Okay. Ken is at least as big a pain in the ass as I am. He's a horrible person, just like me. But I, for some reason, get away with it and he doesn't. As long as Ken is vertical and working, I will work with him. I mean, we're working right now. We just wrapped up a 6-issue miniseries with Mark Guggenheim. I promised myself I wouldn't work with another writer again. And I did, you know, because I like Mark. And Mark came to me with a project that was.
Did you enjoy Blade? Was that a good?
I did. That's what got me to come over to Marvel.
Yeah.
Guggenheim is crazy, but beyond everything else, Guggenheim and also to a great extent Mark Waid are two writers with an extraordinary grasp of the actual real estate of the page. They have a measured understanding of what the page can actually do, which is not true for many comic book writers. And Guggenheim, although he calls out shots in a way that's totally different from the way I do, they make sense, and it works for me. Ken did a great job lettering it. Right now, I'm working on the last chapter of a sequel to a book I did for Dark Horse a couple of years ago called Marked Man for a new website called Neotext, and Ken is lettering that. And right now we're working with Gustavo Yen, or Yen Nitro, who is an astonishing talent who I inherited from Jesus Oborto, who in turn I inherited from Edgar Delgado. There's all these legacies and dynasties of colorists and letterers and stuff. And Ken is, a raging pain in the ass, but he's the best at his job. He's fantastic. We are twin sons of different mothers, and his work is always exemplary.
I mean, to go back to Divided States, I know I keep going back to it. I think that's my favorite lettering of his, because he's doing so much. Like, he's lettering on top of the art. He's doing these sound effects. He's doing this internet chatter. It's insane. Like,
I gave him that note, and I expected to get buttons.
Yeah.
And what I got was this smear of jumble text, which just blew me away.
And the little Twitter avatars in the background, those are whose idea was that? Was that you, or was that him?
That's him. That's him.
That's crazy.
Oh no, he's fantastic. And what I find most alarming and typical is that his career is based on having worked with me. And yet, when other people hire him to do their jobs, to letter their work, they never leave him open enough to do that batshit stuff. And me, I'm always available for batshit. I encourage Ken to take it as far as he possibly can. And that's just the way it is. He's not. I mean, there are guys who can do conventional lettering as well as he does. But what he does is he brings an art director sensibility to the job. And for example, the third arc of Hey Kids, when Michael Gross was hired by the Lampoon after an issue or two, what he brought to them, Doug Kenny always pointed out, was that he basically went out and hired the people who did the original versions of material that he was parodying. And the third volume of Hey Kids uses a lot of that sort of approach. We're going to be doing fake, but very, very close to the truth fanzine covers, specific graphics. One of the things I just spoke to my son, his wife, and their kid. I want to do a mock-up of one of those newspaper/Life magazine stories about kids reading comic books too closely, tying towels around their necks and jumping off roofs.
Yeah.
And Ken will take these photographs and create completely convincing facsimiles of this effect. So I don't trust anyone else to do this in any way. A couple of years back, I did a job for DC, in which one of the panels was a front page of Variety. And what I kept getting was something that didn't look even anything vaguely like Variety. If I gave Ken a note to give me a cover of the front page of Variety, I'd get something that looked exactly like the front page of Variety without any hesitation, because he knows what he's talking about. And he knows what he's doing. This is no affront to other letterers. They're perfectly fine. But nobody works as hard as Ken does. And a lot of it, I suspect, is that, he doesn't really depend on it for a living. He has other jobs. He has other lives. And he's well married. But I think his work is just, he's extraordinary. And he's a raging pain in the ass. I mean, but then again, so am I. We're both cranky and old. We've known each other since we were in our 20s. We met, I think I'm a year older than he is. We met when I was one of Neil's boys and he was Steranko's boy. And when we started working together, when Joe Duffy told me that I mentioned I needed a letter, and she said, try this guy. I said, oh, that guy. Ooh, we got back together and we hit it off immediately. He got exactly what I was doing with Flag. And he
was also a weird time too. Wasn't he living with Steranko at that point?
I don't know. He was nearby. I mean,
okay.
The process of doing Flag in those days was on Fridays, either I or an assistant would go down to the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City, give a box of artwork and $20 to the bus driver who would drop it off in Reading, and Ken would be at the bus station in Reading to pick it up and give him $10. So we had a messenger service made up of bus drivers. It was fantastic. Pre-digital, baby. That's what it's all about.
There's one thing, I was rereading Black Kiss. That's one of my favorite things you've done. There are a bunch of references to, Jack Abel. If you look in the background, there are little like bookshelves in the search of. What was your relationship with him? Was that just, did you work with him? Was that just a pull? What was?
We never worked together. Jack was one of the best guys I've ever known in my life. We met. I was hired by Wallace Wood to pencil a Western strip for these, these kind of vaguely salacious comic strips.
Was it Shattuck?
That's it.
Those veteran the soldier comics they would send out, Sally Forth.
and I was installed in a room with Jack and another cartoonist. And by the time we got lunch, I realized that Jack spent most of his day just fucking with this other guy. And within a day of that, Jack realized that he had an accomplice in me. And the two of us spent the entire experience I was out there just fucking with this poor guy.
Yeah.
And Jack was just that guy. He wasn't a prankster. He was mischief. He was really funny. He was never a particularly good artist, but a perfectly serviceable talent. But he was a beloved figure. Everybody loved Jack. And I would eat lunch with him on a regular basis. There was a coffee shop downstairs from Continuity where Charlotte Ray would come in from Family Ties, Different Strokes, one of those actors, and I knew her from the Nat Hiken stuff. She would come in and work the tables like was the Borscht Belt, and the waitress looked just like George Washington. And Jack made that clear to everybody involved, and it was just constant comedy. I would frequently ride home with Jack on the train, and I would do everything I possibly could to make him spit up on the train, because I've never had a filter. I've never been a filtered person. And I will, I don't believe in anything is too soon, and getting a laugh out of Jack Abel was one of the great joys of my life. I've told this story, which I will never tell in public because I don't want to hurt his feelings anymore, about one of our colleagues that I completely bamboozled in front of Jack. And the bamboozling would have continued had he not noticed that Jack was literally gripping his table, biting himself to avoid laughing. The guy didn't speak to me for 5 years, and it was good. But, in terms of Black Kiss, the guy who edits my stuff asked me whether I'd ever read Saxon Violence, whatever that thing that Peter David did with George Paris. I said, no. He said, it was Black Kiss with compunction, which I thought was hysterical. I love that. And he said, you, on the other hand, me, have no compunction. And that's true. I am compunction free. It's true.
Yeah, I don't know why. This is not a book you would like recommend. This ain't Batman. This ain't like, oh, hey, Joker gets locked up at the end. It's like Dagmar is not first comic material, I think.
Look, it hurts so many people's feelings. I don't like hurting people's feelings by accident. I like to do it on purpose. And, the assumptions made about this book. I mean, I have a very vanilla life. I mean, I'm married. I've been married for 30 years. And before that, I was married to 3 different women for 30 years, but I'm pretty good at this now. And, I live a very lame, quiet life, but that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that I put on paper, as much batshit weird shit as I possibly can, because it's my job. I reject the familiar and the banal. I like fun. I'm the Archbishop of fun, And Black Kiss was really, for me, certainly the first arc was about my nascent paranoia about moving to California and how California just weirded the shit out of me at that point. I was still drinking too much and smoking too much dope and just generally fucked up most of the time. And by the time I was finished with Black Kiss, I'd sobered up, and I remained sober. So yeah, I mean, we're in the process of talking seriously about doing a final Black Kiss. We want to do a Halloween special, and just the general premises are floating around. And maybe if I live long enough, I don't know. We'll see. The next thing on my desk after I finish this Marked Man sequel will be the artwork for Hey Kids Comics Volume 3, which is called The Schlock of the New.
I'm noticing the work you have going on in the background. Is that for Hey Kids? Is that related to anything that we've covered?
What's up there? Let's see. Well, let's see. Well, the drawing table. No, what you see right there is the last couple of pages of Marked Man. The script for the Hey Kids rough draft is over here. I've got my two. I got volume 1 and volume 2 to keep my character names consistent, because people who expect me to remember this shit are just living in a dream.
It's good to know that you have trouble with it also, because I find myself every 3 pages being like, wait, Ray Clark is that guy.
Look, I forgot that I spelled Clark with an E, that kind of thing, and a lot of it would have been easier had I done more direct avatars and names, but I went for Euphonia. And, I mean, it's clear that Bob and Sid are Jack and Stan, or Stan and Jack, and that Ray Clark is very clearly Gil Kane. Mm-hmm. But the other characters are, very much, composites and amalgams. Right now, what I'm doing right now in this arc is I'm doing a version of the Flegels, which features characters who weren't really Flegel based, but are work in the narrative. There are characters. I mean, a lot of it, but all three arcs are, draw on anecdotes that I was paying attention to listening to for years, because most of the old guys hated their lives, hated their work, and despised comics and fans. The opening arc is of volume 3. I was at Marvel. I've been working at DC, and I got my first job at Marvel. And I was at Marvel, and I ran into Mike Esposito, who I didn't know from Adam. But as a kid, as a little boy, I'd been a huge fan of the work that he and Ross had done with Kanigher on Wonder Woman, because Wonder Woman was an absolutely batshit book in the 1950s. Kanigher, which I thought at the time was intentionally fun, but I think Kanigher was just an asshole. One of the worst people I've ever known. And I mentioned another artist who I held in great esteem. And I asked him whether he was a fan. And what he heard me ask was all he heard was the word fan. And I've never heard more contempt in a single syllable as I did from Mike Esposito in the word fan. Just so dismissive. It was fantastic. It really was. And it stuck with me. It was a good learning. It was a good lesson for me. I'm lucky enough to have spent time in the company of all those old guys. Mm-hmm. Gil introduced me to a lot of people, Woody as well, Gray, and Larry Ivy, who was a forgotten man of fandom in the 50s and 60s, who had a salon where I met a lot of the guys who turned me into Golden Age collectors. I met Larry Hama there for the first time.
Right.
And Neil. Neil was the last member of the 5 guys whose shoulders I stand on. The mentorship nature of comics can never be overstated. We learn from everyone, and the problem for me, in terms of acknowledgement, really derives from the fact that most acknowledgement of comic books comes from the aspect of fan service, of echoing and feeding back to the audience what the audience knows it wants. It's the concept of screened memory, and it's all basic. It's absurd opinion, and the whole idea of the material becoming a media, a genre as opposed to a medium. The objections to that are strong and profound, but the fact that the material has demonstrated its huge financial value on a commercial marketplace has made it into a medium. I mean, when people do an Archie television series, it bears more of a resemblance to a Batman comic book in terms of its dark and edginess. The slather of gravitas on children's material, there's no real gap between that than me licensing Curious George and sending Curious George, the Man with the Yellow Hat, back to Africa to deal with an Ebola outbreak. It makes just as much sense.
Can you do that just for the Twitter outrage? Just
I avoid Twitter like the plague because Twitter is a plague in my life. You don't argue with idiots. You just don't.
But I did want to just wrap up with 2 more questions. One of them is going to be like a 2-parter, but you have Times Squared coming out, and Image is going to be putting out the omnibus of the other Times Squared. So this is confirmed that, are we going to be seeing the new Times Squared pretty soon?
Yes, we're having some legal issues on our side, not Image's side, but those will get solved and be taken care of. We were delayed only by those legal issues, which will be dealt with.
Okay. And Sunshine Patriots, you know, I love West.
I have no fucking idea. I'm so pissed off because I really want this to get out there. It's such a fun book. Again, you know, it's an example of me grabbing the commercial gold because nobody else, the comic book business has been dying to read a quasi-Western that takes place in the streets of Los Angeles in 1911. I can't, you know, they're just dying for this. It's a lie. It will, with luck, it may end up being published in Europe first.
This thing is called Wit's End. You know, Wallace Wood is, you know, if I have to put a Mount Rushmore of people, he's definitely on there. Can you talk about your time working with him? You worked on his newspaper strips. You did Wit's End, the original Wit's End.
By the time I did the thing with Wit's End, it wasn't Woody. Woody wasn't there anymore. He was gone.
It was Bill Pearson, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, Bill Pearson. Yeah. Gray Morrow sent me to Woody, and he was a cautionary tale because my experience at that point, I you know, through Gil, I'd met Russ Heath and a couple of other guys, some members of my generation, and I was terrified that I would end up being like Woody, just bitter and angry. He was just so bilious, and you know, and I think, you know, whenever I hear that quote that's attributed to Jack Kirby, "Comics will break your heart, kid," all this other stuff, I have to also feel there's a second sentence in there, which is to say that because I'm different from everybody else, because I've come in here assuming that what happened to everybody else is not going to happen to me. And I think to a profound extent, that was a lot of where Woody was coming from. That he believed he was special, that he believed he was star blessed, and that he would not receive the kind of treatment that everybody else had ever received. And I think the difference between that generation and mine is that we went in with our eyes open. And Woody's bitterness and his biliousness, I think, derived from a profound narcissism that expected different treatment for no reason whatsoever, for no justifiable or obvious reason that anybody would have assumed to be different. Woody was really good, you know. I mean, as Gil said, I mean, the two disparate ends of comic book love are Alex Toth on one end and Wallace Wood on the other, you know. And for me, it's about Toth, it's about Woody, and it's about John Severin. And you know, when I read Jim Thompson for the first time in the mid '80s, the visual images that came in my head were Woody's urban blight stuff that he did for Liberal Hysteria comics, you know, Shock Suspense at the EC. Yeah. You know, when I was a kid, I loved his science. Oh, I love that shit so much.
You know, I mean, story about the kid in the electric chair, and it's talking about his parents' perspective, and they're like, "What did we do wrong?" They're just
it's great. You know, I mean, I loved his science fiction stuff when I was a kid. I never look at it anymore. I look at the Shock Suspense, you know, that Liberal Hysteria stuff. I look at Johnny Craig stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. You know, so and the only EC books I don't own are the horror books because I just don't care about horror at all. Yeah, doesn't interest me in the least. I'm a member of a number of EC fan groups on Facebook, and they're always every so often the issue raises why is Kurtzman considered a genius and not Alfred? Well, there's a reason. But you know, Woody was a troubled and difficult man who sort of sabotaged himself in a lot of ways, and I did too. I mean, I recognize the fact that much of my story is self-sabotage, but once I straightened my life out, I recognized the fact that I couldn't go back and fix what I might have sabotaged, but that I could forge and cut myself a new path and do something with it. And one of the reasons I moved to California was that because as I said earlier, I realized I had no prospects in comics and I had to find some other income stream so I could get this old and not live on Social Security and cat food. And I did. And when I lost my last television job, I was grateful to have had the job, but I also recognized that I was done. I was finished. I was complete. And the upside was that I missed most of how shitty comics were in the 90s. The downside was that my audience had vanished and that I had to build a new audience. And I was being judged by people who had absorbed many of the tropes that I introduced in comics in the 80s and early 90s and found wanting, by people who had no idea that they were second generation imitations of me, which I find just embittering and comically funny. I can live with this.